My name is Lottie, and I'm 58 years old. I'll never forget that Thanksgiving day when my 8-year-old son Tyler sat down at his grandmother's elegant dining table and found a dog bowl filled with kibble. The shock froze me in place as my mother-in-law Margaret smirked and said, "A child of someone from the slums doesn't need a feast." My sweet boy bit his lip, desperately holding back tears. Without a word, I took his hand and walked out, vowing this would never happen again. Let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. There are moments in life that define who we are. I grew up in Chicago's South Side during the 70s and 80s. My parents worked multiple jobs to keep food on our table and a roof over our heads. Dad was a city maintenance worker who picked up night shifts as a security guard. Mom cleaned houses during the day and waitressed on weekends. We lived in a small, 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood most people avoided if they could. But what we lacked in material things, we made up for with love. Every night, no matter how tired they were, my parents made sure we had dinner together. Mom would tell stories about her childhood in rural Kentucky, and Dad would quiz us on everything we'd learned in school that day. They instilled in me and my 2 younger brothers a fierce belief that education was our ticket to a better life. "No one can ever take away what's in your head, Lottie," my mom would say, tapping my forehead gently. "Learn everything you can." I took those words to heart. I studied relentlessly, earning scholarships and working part-time jobs to put myself through nursing school. By 26, I was a registered nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, specializing in pediatric care. The work was demanding, but fulfilled me in ways I couldn't have imagined. Every child I helped gave meaning to the sacrifices my family had made. Then, Richard Harrington walked into my life quite literally when he brought his nephew to the emergency room with a broken arm. Richard was everything I wasn't supposed to have, according to the unwritten rules of Chicago society. Heir to the Harrington Enterprises fortune graduate of Yale and firmly entrenched in the city's elite social circles. But something sparked between us during those hours in the waiting room. "Would it be completely inappropriate to ask for your number?" he asked as they were leaving. "I promise it's not just because you were so good with Danny." 2 weeks later, we had our first date. 6 months after that, we were inseparable. Richard was nothing like what I expected from someone of his background. He was kind, unpretentious, and genuinely interested in my life story. He volunteered at community centers in neighborhoods like the one where I grew up. His passion was using his family's resources to make real differences in people's lives. "You're the most authentic person I've ever met," he told me one night under the stars at Lake Michigan. "You make me want to be a better man." The first time I met his mother, Margaret, I understood why Richard had delayed the introduction for so long. The Harrington family mansion in Lake Forest was intimidating enough with its wrought iron gates and perfectly manicured grounds, but Margaret herself was something else entirely. "So, you're the nurse Richard has been spending time with," she said by way of greeting, looking me up and down like I was a specimen under glass. How unconventional. Throughout that painful first dinner, Margaret made pointed references to the proper education of various family friends' daughters, asked if I found hospital work depressing, and repeatedly mentioned Richard's ex-girlfriend, Caroline, who was apparently now running her family's art foundation in New York. "Richard has always been drawn to charity cases," she said with a thin smile as we were leaving. "It's his one weakness." Despite Margaret's disapproval, Richard proposed 6 months later. He did it at my parents' apartment, getting down on one knee in our modest living room after asking my father's permission. My mother cried. My brothers whooped with joy. My father simply clasped Richard's hand and said, "Take care of our girl." We were married at Chicago Botanic Garden with only one notable absence. Margaret sent her regrets via her personal assistant, claiming a previously scheduled commitment in Europe. Richard was hurt, but not surprised. "She'll come around eventually," he said, though I could tell he didn't believe it. The early years of our marriage were the happiest of my life. We bought a comfortable home in Evanston, close enough to the city for my work. but with good schools for the family we hoped to have. Richard took a position managing the charitable foundation of Harrington Enterprises, rather than joining the corporate side, much to his mother's dismay. 3 years into our marriage, Tyler came into our world. 9 pounds, 4 ounces of pure joy, with Richard's blue eyes and dark hair, and what Richard claimed was my stubborn chin. Margaret made a brief appearance at the hospital, staying just long enough to examine the baby and pronounce him a bit small for a Harrington, before leaving an extravagant silver rattle that Tyler was too young to use. As Tyler grew, Richard became the father I'd always known he would be. Patient, loving, and determined to raise a son who understood both privilege and responsibility. Margaret remained a distant figure, sending expensive gifts on birthdays and Christmas, but showing little interest in actually knowing her only grandson. "She's missing out," Richard would say as we watched Tyler take his first steps or master a new word. "Her loss, not ours." Life continued in its happy rhythm until Tyler turned 6. Richard and I had planned a weekend getaway to celebrate our 9th wedding anniversary. We left Tyler with my parents, promising to bring him a souvenir from Door County, Wisconsin. The call came at 2:17 in the morning. A truck driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. Richard's car had been hit head-on. He died instantly. In the awful, blurry days that followed, I moved through funeral arrangements and legal meetings like a ghost. Tyler clung to me, suddenly afraid I too might disappear. My parents moved in temporarily to help care for both of us. And then Margaret appeared. "Richard was my only child," she said at the wake, her voice crisp despite the circumstances. "And Tyler is my only grandchild. We'll need to discuss arrangements going forward." I was too numb with grief to argue when she began inserting herself into our lives. She updated Richard's will with the family attorney. She organized his personal effects. She began calling Tyler regularly and sending drivers to bring him to Lake Forest for the day. The first Thanksgiving after Richard's death, Margaret insisted we join the family gathering. "Tyler needs to be with family," she said in a tone that brooked no argument. "He needs to understand his heritage." Exhausted and still raw with grief, I agreed. The dinner was formal and uncomfortable, but Margaret behaved herself, and Tyler seemed to enjoy meeting cousins he'd rarely seen. The second Thanksgiving, she called again. "It's tradition now," she declared. "The boy should know his father's family. Richard would have wanted it." Using Richard's wishes against me was a low blow, but effective. Though every instinct warned me to decline, I once again agreed, wanting Tyler to maintain connections to his father's side of the family. That decision would lead to the moment that changed everything. As I drove toward Lake Forest on Thanksgiving morning, a sense of dread settled in my stomach. Tyler, by contrast, was excited, dressed in the new outfit Margaret had sent specifically for the occasion. "Do you think Grandma Margaret will show me the model train set in the attic this time?" he asked, bouncing slightly in his booster seat. "Dad said it was amazing when he was a kid." "Maybe," I replied, trying to match his enthusiasm while tamping down my own apprehension. "We'll have to see." The Harrington estate looked like something from a holiday movie that morning. Massive stone pillars framed the entrance. Garlands of evergreen wrapped the columns of the portico. A massive wreath hung on the front door. It was beautiful, intimidating, and completely devoid of warmth. Margaret greeted us in the foyer, air kissing my cheek and giving Tyler a stiff pat on the shoulder. "You're late," she said, though we were actually 5 minutes early according to the invitation. "Everyone's already in the parlor." Everyone consisted of Richard's Uncle Howard and his wife Beatrice, their 3 adult children, with spouses, several cousins I'd met at the funeral, but whose names escaped me, and Richard's younger sister Jennifer, the only Harrington besides Richard who had ever shown me genuine kindness. Jennifer immediately crossed the room to hug both Tyler and me. "I'm so glad you came," she whispered in my ear. "It's been unbearable without you as a buffer." The pre-dinner small talk was exactly what I'd expected. Questions about Tyler's school carefully crafted to determine whether it was prestigious enough. Comments about my dedication to continue working, despite Richard's life insurance payout, as if holding on to my identity as a nurse was somehow inappropriate. Observations about Tyler's height, intelligence, and mannerisms always circling back to, he gets that from the Harrington side. Tyler tried to join his second cousins who were playing some kind of card game in the corner, but they subtly excluded him, whispering and giggling as he approached. I watched his little shoulders slump as he retreated to sit beside me on the sofa. "Your coat is quite practical," Margaret commented, eyeing my best dress coat as if it were a burlap sack. "J.C. Penney, is it?" "It keeps me warm," I replied with a forced smile. The dinner bell rang at precisely 4:00. We filed into the formal dining room with its crystal chandelier and ancestral portraits. The table stretched the length of the room, set with fine china, sterling silver, and crystal goblets. A massive turkey sat at one end, surrounded by all the traditional sides. Margaret directed everyone to their assigned seats, placing Tyler and me near the far end of the table, away from the main family grouping. I had expected this slight and was prepared to ignore it for Tyler's sake. What I wasn't prepared for was what waited at Tyler's place setting. Instead of the Wedgwood china that graced every other setting, a metal dog bowl sat on the floor next to his chair. It was filled with what looked like kibble, mixed with small bits of turkey and mashed potatoes. The room fell silent as we all registered what we were seeing. Some faces showed shock, others embarrassment, and a few brief smiles quickly hidden behind napkins. Tyler stood frozen, his 8-year-old brain trying to process this deliberate humiliation. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Margaret took her seat at the head of the table, arranging her napkin in her lap. "Oh, I thought it would be appropriate," she said casually. "A child of someone from the slums doesn't need a fancy feast. He should be grateful for any food, shouldn't he? Isn't that what you people teach your children?" Tyler looked up at me, his lower lip trembling as he fought to hold back tears. In that moment, every protective instinct I possessed roared to life. Without a word, I took Tyler's hand in mine. "We're leaving," I said quietly. "Don't be so sensitive." Howard chuckled nervously. "Margaret's just having a bit of fun." "Fun?" I looked around the table. "Is humiliating an 8-year-old child who lost his father fun to all of you?" No one would meet my eyes except Jennifer, who looked horrified. "Tyler, get your coat," I said, squeezing his hand reassuringly. "You walk out that door, don't expect another invitation," Margaret called as we headed toward the foyer. "Richard would be so disappointed in your lack of humor." I paused at the doorway and turned back to face her. "No, Margaret. Richard would be ashamed of you. Completely and utterly ashamed." The drive home was quiet, with Tyler staring out the window and me gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every few minutes, I glanced in the rearview mirror at my son, seeing the hurt and confusion on his face. "Are we bad people, Mom?" he finally asked in a small voice that broke my heart. "No, sweetheart," I replied, fighting back tears. "We're not bad at all. Some people just have ugliness inside them that makes them do cruel things to others. Because we're not rich like them." I pulled the car over, unable to continue driving with the emotion welling up inside me. Turning to face Tyler, I took both his hands in mine. "Listen to me very carefully," I said. "Your worth as a person has nothing to do with money or where you live or what your last name is. It has everything to do with how you treat others and the goodness in your heart. And you, Tyler Harrington, have the biggest, kindest heart of anyone I know." He nodded slowly, though I could tell he was still processing the humiliation he'd experienced. "Your dad would be so proud of how brave you were today," I added, and for the first time since we'd left the Harrington mansion, Tyler's eyes brightened slightly. As we pulled back onto the road heading toward our much more modest home, a fierce determination took root inside me. This would never happen again. I would make sure of it. Our Thanksgiving dinner ended up being turkey sandwiches and store-bought pumpkin pie eaten in our pajamas on the living room floor. I put on Tyler's favorite movie and watched him gradually relax as the evening wore on. After he fell asleep, I carried him to bed and then sat alone in our dark kitchen, replaying the day's events and feeling the hurt transform into something harder and more resolute. My phone had been buzzing with text messages for hours. I finally checked it after midnight. 5 missed calls from Margaret, likely calling to further justify her actions, or perhaps demand an apology for our rudeness in leaving. 3 texts from Jennifer expressing shock and asking if we were okay. 1 surprisingly sympathetic message from Beatrice saying she was deeply troubled by what had happened. I responded only to Jennifer thanking her for her concern and assuring her we were fine. Then I turned my phone off completely. The next morning, Tyler and I had a long, honest conversation about what had happened. I let him express his feelings without interruption, my heart breaking as he described feeling like I wasn't good enough to be a real person. "Grandma Margaret looked at me like I was something yucky on her shoe," he said, picking at his breakfast cereal. "And nobody else said anything to stop her. Sometimes adults do terribly wrong things," I told him, choosing my words carefully. "What happened yesterday says everything about who your grandmother is and nothing about who you are. Do you understand?" He nodded solemnly. "I promise you this." I continued, taking his small hands in mine. "I will never let anyone treat you that way again. Not ever." Just before noon, my phone rang with Jennifer's number. I hesitated before answering. "Lottie, thank God you picked up. I've been so worried about you and Tyler." Jennifer's voice was genuinely distressed. Of all the Harringtons, she had been the only one to fully welcome me from the beginning, often running interference between Margaret and me during family gatherings. "We're managing," I replied, unwilling to give more. "What Mom did was unforgivable," she said. "Several of us told her so after you left, though not forcefully enough, I'm ashamed to say. It's not your responsibility to control your mother, Jennifer." "No, but it is my responsibility to stand up for what's right." She paused. "There's something else you need to know. Something about Richard's will." My attention sharpened. "What about it?" "I don't think you've been told everything. After the funeral, Mom took charge of all the legal matters, right? Yes, she said it would be easier since she knew all the family attorneys. I think she may have misrepresented certain aspects of Richard's wishes, especially regarding Tyler's inheritance." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "Richard set up a trust for Tyler that goes well beyond the life insurance, and there are shares in Harrington Enterprises that should have transferred to Tyler as Richard's heir. Mom's been acting as trustee, but some of her decisions seem questionable." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, suspicious despite myself. "Because what happened yesterday showed me exactly who my mother is," Jennifer replied, her voice hardening. "And I won't be complicit in her cruelty anymore." After hanging up, I paced the apartment for hours, thinking through my options. If Jennifer was right, Margaret had been controlling assets that rightfully belonged to Tyler. The life insurance payout had been substantial, but nowhere near what I would have expected given the Harrington wealth. Late that night, I reached out to Marcus Cohen, a law school friend I'd stayed in loose contact with over the years. He specialized in estate law and had always offered to help if I ever needed legal advice. "This is potentially very serious," Marcus said after I explained the situation. "If there's been manipulation of a trust or inheritance, we need to act quickly." 2 days later, I sat in Marcus's downtown office reviewing copies of documents Jennifer had secretly sent me. The evidence was damning. Richard had indeed established a substantial trust for Tyler with specific instructions about his education future and inheritance of Harrington Company shares. Margaret, as trustee, had been systematically directing those assets elsewhere or simply sitting on them. "She's violated her fiduciary duty," Marcus explained. "The good news is we can challenge this and likely win. The bad news is it could get ugly." "I don't care about ugly," I replied. "I care about what rightfully belongs to my son." That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I pulled out boxes of Richard's personal papers that I'd stored after his death but never fully examined. Among them, I found folders of emails he'd printed notes about company business and personal journals. What emerged was a troubling pattern. Margaret had been manipulating family assets for years, even when Richard was alive, often skirting tax laws and corporate governance rules. I thought about the dog bowl, about Tyler's tears, about Margaret's smirk as she delivered her cruel comment. No, this wouldn't just be about reclaiming Tyler's inheritance. This would be about justice in its fullest sense. The legal battle began quietly with a formal letter from Marcus's firm to Margaret and the Harrington family attorneys. It outlined our concerns regarding the management of Tyler's trust and requested a full accounting of all assets and transactions since Richard's death. The response was swift and dismissive. Margaret's lawyers claimed all actions had been taken in accordance with Richard's wishes and family tradition. They suggested that as an outsider to the family, I simply didn't understand the complexities of wealth management. "This is just the opening salvo," Marcus assured me when I showed him the letter. "They're testing to see if we'll back down. We won't." We escalated by filing formal paperwork with the probate court requesting a review of the trusteeship and alleging mismanagement. This time, the response came directly from Margaret in the form of a scathing phone call. "How dare you?" she hissed. "After everything I've done for you and that boy, this is how you repay the Harrington family?" "Everything you've done?" I repeated incredulous. "Like serving my son dog food at Thanksgiving dinner?" "That was a lesson in humility he clearly needs," she snapped. "Richard would have understood." "Don't you dare tell me what Richard would have understood," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You never knew your son at all if you believe that." The conversation devolved from there, ending with Margaret threatening to use every resource at her disposal to crush this challenge. Our legal strategy took an unexpected turn when Clara, the Harrington family's longtime housekeeper, contacted me through Jennifer. For 30 years, Clara had managed the household, seeing and hearing everything while remaining virtually invisible to the family. "Mrs. Harrington has been destroying documents," she told me during a clandestine meeting at a coffee shop far from the Harrington neighborhood. "Late at night, shredding papers and deleting files." More importantly, Clara had preserved copies of some of these documents, sensing they might be important. Among them were original versions of Richard's wishes for Tyler's inheritance, financial statements, showing transfers from Tyler's trust to other accounts, and tax documents with concerning discrepancies. "Why are you doing this?" I asked her. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I watched Richard grow up. He was a good boy who became a good man, despite his mother's influence. What she did to your son at Thanksgiving, Mr. Richard would never have allowed that." Armed with this new evidence, Marcus arranged a meeting with the Harrington legal team. The atmosphere in the conference room was glacial as our evidence was presented piece by piece. "These are serious allegations," the lead Harrington attorney said carefully. "However, without admitting any wrongdoing, my client would like to propose a settlement." The offer was insulting: a one-time payment of $500,000 in exchange for dropping all claims and signing a confidentiality agreement. "Not even close," Marcus replied, without consulting me, knowing my answer. "We're talking about millions in misappropriated assets, not to mention potential tax fraud that the IRS might find interesting." As we left the meeting, I felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. For the first time since Richard's death, I was truly fighting for our son's future rather than just surviving day to day. Then, a surprising development. A journalist from the Chicago Tribune contacted me asking about rumors of a legal dispute with the Harrington family. Someone had leaked information about our case. "No comment," was my only response, but the damage was done. Within days, the story appeared: Widow challenges powerful Chicago family over inheritance. It was factual, but limited in detail. However, a follow-up article a week later contained the explosive revelation of the dog bowl incident, complete with quotes from unnamed sources present at the dinner. The public reaction was immediate and fierce. Social media erupted with condemnation of the cruel grandmother. Business associates began distancing themselves from Margaret. Several charity boards she sat on requested her resignation. The Harrington name, previously associated with philanthropy and old money respectability, was suddenly linked to cruelty and elitism. I received dozens of messages from strangers sharing similar stories of family estrangement and inheritance disputes. Tyler thankfully remained mostly sheltered from the publicity, though I had to explain to his school why reporters might try to contact him. The pressure intensified within the Harrington family itself. Jennifer called to tell me that several family members concerned about reputational damage were pushing Margaret to resolve the dispute quickly. "Howard and Beatrice are furious," she reported. "Not necessarily because they think Mom was wrong, but because the publicity is affecting business relationships." Through it all, Margaret remained defiant, refusing to acknowledge wrongdoing or to step down as trustee. But when the Harrington Enterprises Board of Directors began asking pointed questions about her personal use of company resources, her position became more precarious. Our first court appearance was brief but impactful. I chose to wear my hospital scrubs straight from my shift, a deliberate contrast to Margaret's Chanel suit and pearls. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, seemed particularly interested in Clara's testimony about document destruction. "This court takes allegations of trust mismanagement very seriously," she said, looking directly at Margaret, "especially when the beneficiary is a minor child who has already suffered the loss of a parent." Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions as we descended the steps. Margaret was hustled into a waiting town car, face rigid with anger. I simply stated, "This case is about securing what rightfully belongs to my son. Nothing more, nothing less." That evening, Margaret's attorneys reached out with a new settlement offer. This one was substantial full restoration of all trust assets. Transfer of the Harrington Company shares, as specified in Richard's original documents, a significant cash payment for emotional distress, and Margaret's resignation as trustee. In exchange, we would sign a confidentiality agreement about the specific terms. I sat at my kitchen table long after Tyler went to bed, considering the offer. It would secure Tyler's future beyond anything I could provide on my own. It would end the legal battle that was consuming my time and emotional energy. But the confidentiality clause felt like letting Margaret off the hook for her cruelty. The next morning, I asked Tyler to sit with me for an important conversation. "The lawyers for Grandma Margaret have offered us a deal," I explained in terms he could understand. "They'll give back all the money and things that Dad wanted you to have." Tyler considered this. "Is that good?" "Yes, it's very good. It means your future is secure. But part of the deal is that we can't talk about what happened. Not the dog bowl, not any of it." His brow furrowed. "So she doesn't have to say sorry." From the mouths of babes, that was indeed the crux of my hesitation. "That's right," I admitted. "She doesn't have to publicly apologize." Tyler thought for a moment, then asked, "What would Dad want?" The question caught me by surprise, bringing tears to my eyes. "Your father would want what's best for you. He'd want you to be taken care of and to have every opportunity." "But he also told me to always stand up to bullies," Tyler said quietly. In that moment, looking at my son's thoughtful face, I knew what my answer had to be. I called Marcus and gave him our conditions. We would accept the financial terms, but we required one additional element: a public apology from Margaret specifically addressing the Thanksgiving incident. "They'll never agree to that," Marcus warned. "Then we keep fighting," I replied simply. To everyone's surprise, including mine, the Harrington legal team returned with acceptance of our terms, with one modification. The apology would be made, but in the form of a general statement about regrettable family discord, without specific mention of the dog bowl. I agreed. We had won. 3 weeks later, Margaret Harrington stood before a carefully selected group of reporters in the Harrington Enterprises conference room. Looking uncomfortable but composed, she read from a prepared statement. Recent events have brought to light certain family matters that should have been handled differently. I acknowledge that in my role as grandmother and trustee, I made decisions that caused pain to my daughter-in-law Lottie and my grandson Tyler. For this, I offer my sincere apology. The statement went on to announce her stepping down from active management of family affairs and the establishment of a proper trust for Tyler with an independent trustee. What it didn't contain was any specific admission about the Thanksgiving incident, though by now, that story had become widely known through media reports. The settlement transformed our lives in practical ways. We moved from our apartment to a comfortable house in a neighborhood with excellent schools. I established a college fund for Tyler separate from his trust, and I reduced my nursing hours to spend more time with him, though I refused to quit entirely. My identity as a nurse was too important to me, and I wanted Tyler to see the value of work you love, regardless of financial necessity. Margaret retreated from public life, spending more time at the Harrington vacation home in Palm Beach. The family closed ranks around her, though Jennifer continued to maintain contact with Tyler and me, becoming something of an aunt figure to him. The most remarkable change came in Tyler himself. Rather than being traumatized by the experience, he seemed to draw strength from the resolution. At 8, going on 9, he was too young to understand the legal and financial complexities, but he grasped the essential lesson his mother had fought for him and won. "Mom," he said one evening as I tucked him in, "I'm glad you didn't let Grandma Margaret be mean to us anymore." "I'll always protect you," I promised, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "Always." 6 months after the settlement, I received an unexpected request. Margaret wanted to meet with me alone. My first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity won out. We met at a neutral location, a private room at the Chicago Club, where neither of us would feel at a disadvantage. Margaret looked older than I remembered, the imperious demeanor somewhat diminished. "Thank you for coming," she began stiffly. "I'll be direct. I would like to establish a relationship with Tyler." I studied her face, looking for signs of the cruelty I'd seen at Thanksgiving, but saw only a careful neutrality. "Why?" I asked simply. "He's my only grandchild, my only connection to Richard." "He's also the child you served dog food to," I reminded her. "The child you called a slum dweller's son. Why should I allow you anywhere near him now?" Margaret flinched slightly. "I was wrong." She said the words clearly difficult for her. "I was cruel." "Yes, you were, but I still don't understand why." She was silent for a long moment, her fingers worrying at her pearl necklace. "When Richard brought you home, I saw everything I feared. Someone from outside our world, someone who might change him, pull him away from the path I'd planned. And then he did change. He chose the foundation over the company. He moved away from Lake Forest. He rejected everything I valued." "He became his own person," I corrected. "That's what children are supposed to do." "Not in my world," she replied with unexpected candor. "When he died, I thought I could reshape Tyler, raise him with proper Harrington values, since I'd failed with Richard. The dog bowl—" She paused, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "It was a moment of spite. Unforgivable, I know." The admission surprised me. "You're right. It is unforgivable. And yet I'm asking you to consider allowing me some small role in Tyler's life. With your supervision, of course. On your terms." I considered her request, thinking of Tyler and what would be best for him long term. Despite everything, Margaret was his only connection to his father's family, to half of his heritage. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "But it would start with very limited supervised visits, and at the first sign of anything negative, it ends permanently." Margaret nodded, accepting these strict terms without argument. As we prepared to leave, she hesitated, then added, "Richard would have been proud of how you fought for Tyler. He chose better than I ever gave him credit for." Coming from Margaret, this was as close to a genuine compliment as I would ever receive. I nodded acknowledgement, but said nothing more. Some wounds take more than words to heal. After careful preparation and discussion with Tyler, we arranged a short, carefully controlled visit. Margaret brought a thoughtful gift, a photo album of Richard as a child that Tyler had never seen, and behaved with perfect propriety. Tyler was reserved but polite. As the months passed, these visits gradually became more regular. Margaret was never going to be a warm, nurturing grandmother figure, but she did make a visible effort to connect with Tyler on his terms, asking about his interests and listening to his stories. Most surprisingly, at Tyler's suggestion, we invited Margaret to join us for Thanksgiving the following year. She accepted with what appeared to be genuine gratitude. As we prepared for her arrival, Tyler asked a question that showed just how much he'd processed the events of the previous year. "Do you think Grandma Margaret can change, really change?" I considered my answer carefully. People can change if they truly want to, but it usually happens slowly. Your grandmother has lived a certain way for a very long time. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. "I'm going to be extra nice to her today, not because she deserves it, but because that's who I want to be." In that moment, I saw Richard so clearly in our son. His compassion, his emotional intelligence, his fundamental decency. Whatever came next, I knew Tyler would be all right. 2 years have passed since that terrible Thanksgiving with the dog bowl. Looking back, I can see now that moment was both an ending and a beginning. The end of my attempts to accommodate Margaret's cruelty for Tyler's sake, and the beginning of our journey toward true independence and healing. Our lives today bear little resemblance to the precarious existence we led then. Tyler, now 10, is thriving in a school that nurtures his love of science and music, subjects Richard also loved. I still work as a pediatric nurse, but now I also run a foundation that helps single parents navigate legal and financial challenges after losing a spouse. The work is my way of honoring Richard's memory and turning our painful experience into something positive. The relationship with Margaret remains complicated. She will never be the warm grandmother figure of storybooks, but she has maintained her efforts to build a respectful relationship with Tyler. The transformation in her has been subtle but real. Where once there was open contempt, there is now a cautious regard. Where there were attempts to control, there is now something approaching respect for boundaries. Last month, she surprised us by attending Tyler's school science fair, sitting stiffly but attentively as he explained his project on renewable energy. Afterward, she told him his father would have been fascinated by his work, one of the few times she has voluntarily mentioned Richard in a positive context. Tyler has shown remarkable resilience through all of this. Children often absorb the lessons we least expect them to take from difficult situations. From our struggle with Margaret, Tyler didn't learn bitterness or entitlement. Instead, he developed a keen sense of justice and the courage to stand up for himself and others. Just last week, his teacher called to tell me Tyler had defended a new student who was being teased about his accent and clothes. "Your son told the other children that what makes a person special isn't what they wear or how they talk," she reported. "He said it's how they treat people who can't do anything for them." I couldn't have been prouder. In that moment, I knew Richard was somehow witnessing the wonderful person our son was becoming. The Harrington wealth that caused so much conflict is now properly managed in trust for Tyler's future. I've made it clear to him that while the money will provide opportunities, it doesn't define his worth or determine his path. When he turns 18, he'll have choices to make about his role in the Harrington business empire. Choices I'm confident he'll approach with wisdom beyond his years. As for me, I've found unexpected strength in standing up to Margaret. For too long after Richard's death, I allowed myself to be diminished by her judgment, unconsciously accepting her assessment of my worth. The fight for Tyler's inheritance became a fight for my own self-respect as well. Life teaches us in unexpected ways. Sometimes the cruelest moments can trigger the most necessary changes. Had Margaret not placed that dog bowl in front of my son, I might have continued allowing her subtle undermining of our dignity for years to come. Her most blatant act of unkindness ultimately freed us both. This Thanksgiving, we're hosting a dinner for several families from the hospital where I work, single parents and their children who could use some holiday cheer. Tyler is excited to help cook. Margaret has been invited but hasn't yet confirmed if she'll attend. Either way, our table will be full of laughter, gratitude, and mutual respect, the true ingredients of any feast worth sharing. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who tried to make you feel less than worthy? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the experience? Share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult moments. Remember to share this with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for themselves or their children. Thank you for listening, and may your own family gatherings be filled with genuine love and respect, not just polite appearances.